My name's Paul Marjorie. I'm an attorney. I have two offices. I'm here in Wauwatosa and Elm Grove. And my practice is estate planning for families of all different sizes and ages and groups. So thank you to Courtney for having me today. So I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about the importance of estate planning and how that is important for yourself and for also all of the people that you love in your life. How many people, show of hands, have an estate plan set up? Okay. So 2/3 of people statistically don't have anything set up. And I think that number is actually a lot higher because I think people actually, even though they're anonymous, they answer surveys where they think they have the answer. And a lot of people think of estate planning only in the terms of what happens to me when I pass away. And what people don't realize is that estate planning is super important because half of a proper estate plan is taking care of you when you're still alive. Everybody should have three things. There's three pillars to an estate plan, okay? The first thing is a will, and we're gonna get into that. But the other two pillars that often get misplaced or forgotten about are powers of attorney. Everybody's gotta have a health power of attorney, and everybody's gotta have a financial power of attorney. Now, a health power of attorney is very important because we need to make sure that you have a voice and advocate for yourself if you ever get incapacitated. So a healthcare power of attorney deals with the questions of nursing home admission, end of life issues, two doctors determine that you're in a persistent vegetative state, death is imminent, feeding tubes, life-sustaining procedures, also the obviously important thing about organ donation. But the real crux of the healthcare power of attorney is making sure there's someone in your life that has access to your medical records, okay? If you are in an accident, you're gonna have a lot of friends and family going to the hospital to help, but no one's gonna be able to do anything for you if you haven't authorized them to get your information and make decisions for you. That's super important, especially for someone who maybe has lost a spouse. You know, your kids aren't gonna be able to make decisions for you. It's super important for someone who's not married. You know, they have a significant other for years and years and years, but you're legally not married, that person's not gonna make any decisions for you unless you have that in place. And that's something that you don't wanna put off because you can only give that power while you're able to do so. So once you're ever found, you know, mom gets old enough where now she's deemed to be incompetent, well, hey, she can't grant any powers anymore. So it's really important to get those things done on the front end for use on the back end, right? A financial power of attorney is very important as well because if something were to happen to you, you need someone that's going to be able to pay your bills and go to the bank and call your insurance company and your financial advisor. Without having those things in place, you know, if you call your brother's financial advisor, he's legally got to hang up the phone unless he has that piece of paper saying he's authorized to talk to you. So a financial power of attorney I like to think about is used for everything that you do in your daily life except pick up dry cleaning. Now, the will is also, as I said, very important. What a will is, it's a legal document that just memorializes what your intentions are. It appoints someone to be in charge of your estate when you pass away. And that's where you have your wishes of where you want your assets to go. If you had young children, for example, that's where you would name your guardians. Now, so many people either don't have them in place or they have them and they're not using it right, or, well, they weren't educated with how these work. So I meet so many people that have wills and they are under the belief that a will solve all of their problems. They won't have, their families won't have to do anything. It's It's going to be very clean and simple. Well, in truth, a will is nothing more than your written instructions to a court to go through probate. Have any of you heard of probate before? Okay, some shaking of heads. Have you ever had to go through a probate? Okay. If you haven't, you're lucky. What probate is when you have assets, they have to go through the court system for the court to distribute them. Now, if you have a will, the court's going to follow your will. There's a misconception that the state gets involved and the state decides everything. No, they don't. They follow your wishes, okay? If you pass away without a will, then the court has to rely on statute. And they go, according to statute, and start distributing assets. So if you pass away and you have a spouse, everything goes to the spouse. If you don't have a spouse and you have children, they go to the children. If there's no children, it goes to your parents. If your parents are deceased, it goes to your siblings. There's just a pecking order. That may work fine or not, but there are instances of someone who's lived a long life and they've outlived a lot of the loving people around them, and suddenly their second cousin is getting all of the assets. Well, I don't know how close you are to your second cousin. I'm not, but the purpose of probate on paper is entirely noble, in my opinion. The court wants to get involved to make sure that your wishes are being followed. Can't argue with that, right? So let's find out what the wishes are. Let's gather the assets. Let's pay creditors. And then what's left gets distributed where you want it to go, okay? The downside that some people find in probate is that it takes a lot of time and it can take a lot of money to go through. And that's the downside. That's what people don't know about. A very simple probate is going to take 6 to 12 months to go through, where everything's tied up, everything's basically frozen, because we have a lot of statutory waiting periods. We have to wait for creditors to show up, creditors to get paid, all those kind of things. And there are plenty of people that are in year 2 of a probate. It can take a long time. There's also costs involved with that. Based on the amount of assets, the more assets you have, the more you have to pay the court to do it, right? They don't do this out of the goodness of your heart. This is not your reward for paying your taxes all these years. But the real cost of it comes into play with probate attorneys. Probate attorneys are very expensive. Why is that? Well, if it's a year-long project, that's gonna start adding up pretty darn quick. And a lot of probate attorneys will require money up front to even get the case going. I've heard stories of probate attorneys saying, sure, I can help you with that, send me $5,000 and we're gonna go from there. So it can get pretty expensive pretty quick. So there's a couple of ways to get around, well actually there's 3 ways to get around probate. The average person needs nothing more, as I said, besides a will, a health, and a financial power of attorney. And the average person will never go through probate because they don't have the assets required to trigger it. So in Wisconsin, if the sum total of your assets, you take the money in your checking account, you take your investments, if you add everything together and you're under $50,000, okay, that's the sum of everything, you don't have to go through probate. Why is that? Well, if you think about the time and money to go through these things, the state of Wisconsin said, look, there's no money in it for the court, there's no point in paying an attorney to do all this work. We can just transfer it through a document called a transfer by affidavit. It's a document that you take to the bank and you say, yeah, my mom had $500 in her checking account. She has a car that's worth, $2,500. Just move it to my name. The reason why I say that is, statistically as a society, it's like 64% of people, if they had an emergency money need, they need to borrow $1,000 from somebody else. The vast majority of us just don't have any assets. If you rent an apartment and lease a car and live check to check like the majority of Americans, sure, you have something that you need to give to a loved one, something you want to provide for someone else, but it's not enough to go through the court system. If you are a homeowner, if you own your home, I can guarantee you, regardless of what is in your bank account, you will be in probate. Because the court does not look at your equity position, they look at the entire value of the property. And every year as property values are going up, more and more people are way past that $50,000 threshold. For example, I could buy a home today. I could buy a home that's worth $200,000. I can put $10,000 down. The bank owns 190 of it, right? If I don't wake up in the morning, that house goes through probate because the court says it's a $200,000 asset, regardless of my equity, okay? So if you have assets, an IRA, some life insurance, maybe a 401k, your home, there's a couple of ways to avoid probate if that is a goal that you have. And what it comes down to is risk tolerance. You know, I meet lots of clients, we always talk about options, and I have some clients that, you know, are one extreme. They have all these horror stories, they read something, they saw a movie, they heard something on TV, and they want this kind of plan, and I'm desperately trying to talk them out of doing it. And then I have some clients on the other end, all the warning signs are there, I'm telling them this really would make a lot of sense for your family, and come hell or high water, it's just not gonna happen, right? But there's a couple of ways to avoid probate if it's a concern. And the way I do my practice is story-based planning. This has nothing to do with the amount of assets you have. I have very wealthy clients who have a very simple story. Let's use that to their advantage. Let's keep the plan simple. And I have some clients, it's complex. I tell you folks, you wouldn't want their life for $1 million. It's gonna be complicated. Now we gotta do a little more planning on the other end. If you meet with an estate planning attorney and the first meeting is nothing more than them asking you how much you have in your bank account and how much is in your IRA and what's your house worth, can I see your life insurance policies? My suggestion to you is that you politely get up and walk out. My opinion is that is an attorney trying to figure out what they can sell you, not what you actually need. And I meet lots of people that have plans in place. They work with someone else. They don't know what they have. They want me to explain it to them. When I do, a very common answer I get from, a question I get from them is, why do I have this plan? This isn't what I asked for. This doesn't make sense. There's a lot of people that have plans. They got sold something based on assets. They didn't get it based on the story, okay? So what I mean by that is, one way to avoid probate is to have a will. Now again, if you just have a will, we're going through probate, right? But you can avoid probate very easily by having a will to memorialize your intentions, and then having beneficiaries on all of your assets. If everything you have has a beneficiary, everything would pass outside of probate to whoever you name. And you can do that with your investments, you do that with your life insurance, your IRA, your 401k. You can even do that with your bank accounts, and you can put a beneficiary on your home. And most people don't know you can do that. When you work with a life insurance professional, if you have an investment advisor, they're smart people. They understand the importance of these things, how beneficiaries work, that's part of their job. But when you open up a bank account, there is no teller out there that's asking you who you want as a beneficiary on your checking account. They just don't do that. And they would love to have your money tied up in probate so it can sit at the bank for another year. And when people buy a home, your mortgage lender, your realtor, no one is talking to you about beneficiaries because that's just not their job, right? So if you put beneficiaries on everything, everything passes outright. It's still very important to have a will. My argument for that is if you forgot an asset, it's important to still have it in writing. They should mirror each other, right? But that's a very simple and easy way to avoid probate. And I use that all the time. When I have an older person, an older couple, and they say to me, Paul, we're at the age. Whenever it happens, I don't know when it will, but whenever it does, I just want my kids to have my assets. They're old enough, they're good people, let them have it. A will and beneficiary gets us exactly where we need to be. The other way to avoid probate is by setting up what they call a revocable trust. Have you ever heard of that term before? A little bit. So a revocable trust is a trust that we create while you're alive, and we put your assets into them. A revocable trust does nothing for you whatsoever. It doesn't give you any tax advantages, there's no liability protection, anything like that. The only reason it exists is that someday when you pass away, you name someone to take the trust over and continue to run the trust for the benefit of all the people that you name in it. Having a trust changes nothing about the way you live. Everything you did last week without a trust, you would do next week with a trust. There's no tax advantages or disadvantages. It only allows us to hand over the assets to another person, a trustee. Think of it like a custodian, and administer your wishes. Now, I do trusts all the time, but there's got to be a reason for it. So if you had minor children, a trust would make a lot of sense because we have to hold on to those assets for a long time. My first example was, mom and dad giving the assets to the adult kids, right? That's through that beneficiary. But let's say you wanted to give, I'm gonna give half my stuff to my kids, but I really wanna set stuff aside for my grandkids, my little grandkids that are still minors. A trust would be a good reason for that. I do trusts all the time when I have someone that's an adult person that's disabled or handicapped. We don't wanna let a disabled person inherit being a beneficiary because they're probably gonna lose their benefits. And if they ever burn through the money, there won't be that social safety net that they're gonna need someday when you're gone. And I do trusts all the time for people that don't have any kids. They've got nieces and nephews, they've got some charities, they've got a church that they want to provide for. They have a lot of beneficiaries. A trust just makes it easy to administer things. Again, going back to that classic example of mom and dad with a couple of kids. You could go to the bank teller and say, I have 2 kids, would you please name them as pay on death on my bank account? But imagine you went up to that same bank teller and said, good morning, I have 25 beneficiaries, right? Logistically, it just doesn't work. If you take your pie and you start cutting it up into really small slices for a lot of people and organizations, a trust makes a lot of sense. Everybody needs a will, but not everybody needs a trust. There's a real big difference between the two. Okay, does that make sense? Now, when we talk about beneficiaries, if we go the will route, we name the individuals as beneficiaries. If you go the trust route, you name the trust as the beneficiary. That's just how we line things up to get things distributed. But I want to talk about the importance of your home. And the home, for a lot of people, is their biggest asset. And a lot of people recognize the importance of passing the home on to their kids. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. So a lot of people I meet have either done this already or they're ready and eager to. The solution they come up with is, I own my home and I'm gonna put my kids on the title. So someday when I pass away, my kids will still be left entitled. They'll get the house. Yeah, that's gonna work, but it's got a lot of unintended consequences. I'm a firm believer in that you own your home. No one else should ever have any rights to it. No one should ever have any say in it. It's your home. And if I want you to be able to sell it tomorrow, do whatever you want with it, and no one can have any say in that. The second issue is creditor issues. If you put your adult child on your home with you, and they get into a bad car accident, and they had really lousy car insurance, there's maybe some bills that aren't gonna get paid. Well, their creditors could attach to your home because you made them an owner, right? And the third reason for me is the biggest one, it's the taxation. There's the concept of basis. Basis is what you paid for your home. And the longer you live in the home, that home will appreciate in value. If you put your kids on the title while you're alive, they inherit your cost basis, what you paid for that home. And someday when you pass away and they sell that home, they're paying capital gains on all of that money. It's your home. If you sold it tomorrow, you probably won't pay taxes. It's your primary home, but it's not your kids, right? By doing transfer on death the way I do it, they don't inherit the home until the year you passed away at that current value. That's called the step up in basis. And if they sell it for today's money, the entire home goes tax-free to your kids. Give everything to your kids, give everything to anyone that you want to leave in this world, but don't give them anything until you die. That's the only way we're going to get around the taxes. It's just like an investment. You get a step up in basis. The only thing that you ever pay taxes on are IRA monies that you never pay taxes on, right? Someone's got to pay it at some point, so that we don't skip out on, but everything else can pass tax-free. So it's super important to understand the concept of what's the best way to transfer assets to our kids or our grandkids or our loved ones, but just make sure you're doing it in a really smart way. Does that make sense? Now, for people that it makes sense to do a revocable trust, a very common issue that I see is people have these trusts, they get them set up, and they put it on the shelf, and that's as far as it goes. And mom tells her kids for years and years and years, don't worry, it's all in the trust. All you gotta do is grab the binder on the shelf. Someday when mom passes away, the kids are gonna realize that mom never did other steps, her trust is completely empty, and we're still in probate. Much like putting people as a beneficiary on an account, if you have a trust, your trust has to be the beneficiary of the assets. It's like putting gas in a car, right? You can have the best car, heated seats, everything you wanted. If there's no gas in the tank, that car is not going to go anywhere. So what I do when I help people is to go through all of the steps to make sure that your trust is funded. I just described to you doing transfer on death with the house. Well, if you have a trust, you would deed the house to your trust. It's still your house, you're still in control. Doesn't change anything about the way you live. It's putting beneficiaries on your assets. It's putting pay on death on your bank accounts. It's all those necessary steps to make sure that that trust is going to work someday. Does that make sense? So everybody needs to have a plan in place. I think your plan is going to be based on your story. Bare minimum, statistically, long before you die, you're going to get sick, you're going to get hurt. So everybody's got to have that health and financial POA. But how we transfer our assets to our loved ones, that's based on your story. What makes the most sense for you? What makes the most sense for them? What fits your budget? I'd stress will and beneficiaries. A trust if it makes sense. A bare bones minimum will if we don't have many assets and we're just thinking about, we know probate won't be an issue, because mom has one checking account with $3,000 in it, right? But have a plan in place. If you don't do anything, the state's gonna figure out who makes medical decisions for you. The state's gonna figure out who does financial things for you. The state's gonna figure out where your assets go. If you think about how great they do with the highways, I don't know if you want the state doing your estate plan, right? Does that make sense? So I guess let's just open it up for some general questions.
My question is, okay, you do all that, you put all your money to your your kids and your grandkids and all that stuff, you to make your will and trust. But what if you're still living and you can't take care of yourself, you don't have anybody that, and then you go into like a nursing home facility, and you, it, obviously, you only can stay there for a limited amount of time unless you get on Medicaid, but then they're actually taking all your savings that you were gonna save for your grandkids and your daughter, or whatever, and, you take your house and everything else. How do you protect that?
So that is the ultimate question. You know, we never know how long we're gonna live. We never know the level of care that we're gonna need. So there is another type of trust that you can use for Medicaid planning, okay? And with everything in life, there's a plus and there's a minus, okay? In irrevocable trust, it's called. So what I was talking about before is called revocable. You're in charge of it, you do what you want, doesn't change the way you live. An irrevocable trust is a trust that you create while you're alive, you put your assets into them, and here's where it totally turns a corner. Once you put them in, legally they're not yours anymore. You can't make any changes. Basically, they're just put on a shelf. Most of the time, you have to appoint another person to be in charge of it for you. And now you're reliant on them to take care of you. I've used those. I don't do a lot of those. I have some professionals that I work with. That's all that they do. That's their wheelhouse, and that's where I would refer you to. I've done a few of them in the past, and I've done them when there's a real big reason for it. I've had a client one time who came to me and said, look, it killed my grandma, it killed mom, it's going to kill me. I went to the doctor today, they said I have 2 years to live. I guess I'm at peace with that, I knew it was coming. My big issue is I have to get everything figured out in the next 6 months because I'm gonna be incapacitated. I need someone to take care of me. Well, the average person can't see the end of their own road. A lot of people, when I talk to them about irrevocable trusts, the average person doesn't really want to give up. They understand the importance, their desire to put things aside for their family, but the average person doesn't want to, and I can't blame them. They don't want to give up that control. So what you're telling me, Paul, is I've worked all my life, I did all these side jobs, I did all this overtime, and I saved, I made good investment decisions, now I gotta turn everything over to somebody else? I don't know. You know, that's a real difficult thing. For it to work, Medicaid has a 5-year look back. So you would have to set this trust up, wait 5 years and a day before you go into a nursing home, or even all of that planning you did doesn't work. The point of Medicaid is they don't want a millionaire pulling up to the nursing home, throwing off their fur coat and saying, I'm destitute, right? So it's the planning of it. So I've had clients have some better results. You know, you could gift money to your kids. Everything falls within that 5-year window. You could gift money to your kids. Well, the downside to gifting is once you gift it, it's gone. I don't know how long I'm gonna live. Everything's more expensive. Again, the idea of everything has a plus and a minus. But I've had some clients have a good result. You're much better off going into a nursing home with some money in your pocket. A lot of nursing homes will have a buy-in. If you can pay the first couple years up front, then they let you stay there even if you run out of money. That's a vastly different standard of living than a facility that just takes a Medicaid patients. So there's no perfect answer, but there's a couple of options. You just have to be able to live with the consequences of those actions and plan far enough ahead. You know, I don't even know what I'm doing next week, right? I can't plan for 5 years. I get calls all the time. Hi, good morning, it's Tuesday, yeah, I'm taking my mom to a nursing home on Friday, how do I hide all of her money? Well, it's too late for that, right? But there are some professionals that deal with that, have some ideas. So if that's something that, you know, is of interest to you, you could always contact me and I could put you in touch with somebody. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks.
So the gentleman hypothetically had 2 years, you couldn't do anything, cause he's not gonna be around for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So all his money, if he needed to go into a nursing home, it would be gone.
He was never gonna worry about a nursing home because he was gonna be dead. His concern was, I just gotta get someone to take care of me. I'm using his voice, I'm happily giving up everything to somebody else because I can't take care of myself. You know, he's got 6 months to get it going, to live another year and a half. It's that year and a half, I need someone to help me. So for him, that was the answer for that.
You have to do it before you get in a nursing home.
Oh, yeah.
All that 5 years,
5 years before you go in.
well, you can't predict it though.
That's how the government catches you, right?
That's to get on Medicaid, it's a 5-year thing.
You know, most people don't have the foresight, the ability to forecast. How can you, to know at what point you're gonna need this and be willing to give up assets and live, you know, what if you did this irrevocable trust and you lived at home for another 10 years and you never needed to go into a nursing home? Well, that's 10 years of where you had no control over your assets and you're hoping someone else did right by you. Again, it's the plus and minus idea. Right?
So if you have a plain will,
Hmm?
in our case, we have a 40-year-old son. So what if we have him on everything and he dies before us? I mean, you don't know.
So, does he have children?
Stepchildren.
Okay. So,
But I could see them having my daughter-in-law on it.
Mhm.
So you'd have to, is it better to have 2 people on it?
well, what I would suggest to you is, you know, you could change your benefit. So have you done beneficiaries on your assets, or is it just the will that you have?
I don't have anything yet.
Okay, so if you said in your will, everything goes to your son, and if your son is deceased, it goes somewhere else, right?
Okay.
Then mirror that with the beneficiaries. So make your son the primary beneficiary, and if he's gone, then you have your contingent on there.
Okay.
Now, one thing, if you have a will and you're gonna avoid probate by having beneficiaries, it works great. But you just gotta make sure you're staying on top of it. If you have someone, if you named Bob as the beneficiary on an asset and Bob died, you gotta go back to that asset and take Bob off and put someone else on, right? It's just maintaining it. If you did the trust was the beneficiary. If Bob died, you just have to modify the trust document and you never have to touch any other of those accounts. You know, for some people that have a lot of different assets in a lot of different places, I had a client one time, he had like a dozen bank accounts. I'm like, why do you have so many bank accounts? He just liked all these bank accounts. Well, okay, here's the question then for you. Do you want to get in the car and go to 12 banks tomorrow? Or do you want to just be able to come in and make a phone call and tweak a couple sentences? If you like driving around to the banks, that's a totally great option. And if you want to stay home and watch TV, that's the other option, right? But that goes to another point. It's super important to stay on top of these documents. These are living documents. A lot of people don't do estate planning because they think it's forever. I get one chance to do this. Oh my God, I can't even come up with an answer. They freeze up and they never do anything. If you think about your estate plan as a living document, what's the best plan for right now? Who's the best person right now to make your decisions? You know, if you woke up in the hospital, who do you want standing there? Where do you want your assets to go right now? Put that in place. People die, people move, you change your mind. It's super easy to change those documents. If you have a major life event, your son passes, for example, major life event, tweak your documents. It's not forever. I find my clients have a much easier and better experience just thinking about the now. What's the best plan for right now? We'll see what happens with life. Again, you can make those adjustments. Does that make sense?
I have a question.
Please.
So, when my mom, before she passed, transferred, we were farmers, so we have farmland. And so she transferred that land into the kids' estates, okay? So now we're at the point where, well, geez, you know what's gonna happen when I go, because there's 5 people now that own that land, you know what I mean? So, could you do like a transfer of death beneficiary kind of thing for that?
Yeah. Now, one question I have for you. So it's you and 4 siblings, so 5 total. How did you take title? Joint tenants?
Yeah, and then my nephew actually farms the land and we get rental income.
So what you'd want to take a look at is the deed that transferred it to you guys. If it's a joint tenants, it means it stays among the survivors. So if you pass away, it's just going to go to your other siblings. So we're going 5, 4, 3. You got one. One's going to get the farm. One will buy the farm someday, right? If it just lists your names and it doesn't have joint tenants, that means it's what they call tenants in common. And tenants in common means that when you pass away, it does not go to the survivors, it goes to your estate. Which would mean it would go to your kids.
Yeah.
Okay? That is how then you want to do that transfer on death to get it to the kids, to get it to them outside of probate. But you got to talk to your siblings and say, hey guys, we're joint tenants. Do we intend that just to stay within the 5 of us? Or did we intend that to go to our kids?
Well, it would be interesting because one of them just passed away.
Okay.
So we'll find out about that.
So there's a big difference there, how you take title. Does that help?
Thank you.
If you want to put the beneficiaries on your house,
Mhm.
just do that through your will.
No.
So it's a separate document that you have to prepare. It's called the transfer on death. You have to do it while you're alive. It has to get recorded at the courthouse while you're alive. You can't do it after death. I've had instances, I had one just a few months ago. Family calls me up and, mom's not doing so well. I hurried up, we moved quick to get that done. I got it recorded. She died 2 days later. Had I not gotten my butt over there, that would have been a big problem. It's got to be done when you're alive, and it's got to be recorded at the courthouse while you're still alive. So, but yeah, separate document. Again, the will memorializes your intentions. Have it in writing. Let the world know, hey, this is where stuff's going. This is where stuff's not going. I make no provisions for people. You spell those things out. But the heavy lifting is done with the beneficiaries on the assets.
He had my question exactly.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, the cost. Why
So-
not?
So I do everything flat fee. So it depends on what makes the most sense for you. Basically, what I like to do with a person is let's sit down, let's talk about your story, let's look at the options. We all have options. I love the idea of every plus has a minus, right? Let's figure out where the more pluses are and less minuses. Based on what you need, based on your story, I always give people a firm quote. This is what the cost is. I don't do anything hourly. I tell my kids, if you're gonna spend money, spend smart money. It's hard to make, it's easy to spend. I have all these dadisms I tell the kids all the time. But I would quote you out exactly what it would be to the penny, and then you say, hey Paul, that's awesome, you're unbelievable, I love you so much, or jump in the lake. Does that make sense? Questions?
So we we went to the bank and added our kids as beneficiaries.
Perfect.
That's all we have to do for that, right?
Yep, make sure, and it's not per bank, it's per bank account, checking,
Right.
We did.
savings,
Yeah,
money
we
market,
did that,
Yep.
yeah.
right?
Yeah, we did.
Don't put their name on the account now while you're alive. Put them as a pay on death. Okay? House, bank accounts, investments, life insurance. If it generates a statement, if it has an account number, you can put a beneficiary on it. Make sense?
I have a life insurance policy, but I haven't, I've looked for the policy, I can't find it.
Okay.
It'd be best to have the, policy sent to me.
Yeah, do you know what company it was? That-
There's no question.
Yeah, call them up today, they can totally look you up in the system, get you a copy of it. And while you have them on the phone, hey, who's the beneficiary on this thing, right?
I know who the beneficiary is.
Well,
I'm changing that anyway.
okay, good. I cannot tell you the importance of making a list of where your assets are. Take your time, here's all my bank accounts, here's all my policies, here's all my investments, and you double check everything, all right? I meet people all the time that they swear up and down to me, Paul, I remember it was a Saturday, I had the game on, I was sitting at my kitchen table, it was the bottom of the third. You have it all played out in your mind, that never happened. I mean, I can tell myself something 100 times in a row and I'll believe it, didn't mean I did it. You gotta trust but verify everything. It costs you nothing but your own time to double check your work, but it's a really expensive mistake if you do it wrong, right? I had a client years ago. I've been doing this 24 years. One time her eyes were rolling so far back into her head, she was just rolling her eyes at me the entire time. She called me a week later and said, Paul, I'm really sorry the way I acted in your office. You were totally right, I never did this, right? So, just double check everything. But yeah, I would absolutely call. Make sense?
The other thing is I have a policy with the company
Okay.
that I work for, and I've tried to get hold of them, and I haven't been able to get hold of them.
Are they still in business?
Still, well, the main company is still in business. I worked at Frigate Mall.
Okay.
So I have a telephone number, but I call it and I don't get, how would I go about getting anything from them?
Do you get anyone?
I have my contract that states that we had insurance.
So,
when we retired.
so the company, the main company is still in business?
Yes,
I would call up them and ask for someone in HR, okay? And start there with the conversation, hey, I haven't worked here, how do I track this down? But I would call HR for that, okay? Do you get a voicemail or does it just ring?
once I got a person and they gave me their own information,
Yeah.
and then after that,
I'd go right to HR, cause they're the people that have the plans that help employees, put things the right way, so I would start there.
If I have a financial power of attorney in place and I die tomorrow,
Mm-hmm.
would that person be able to write a check out of my
Nope.
checkbook with just my name? You need the or, right?
Yep.
So does it behoove one to have another checking account with an or?
Well, so powers of attorney stop the second that you pass away. Okay? You take your last breath, they can check for a pulse and they throw the POA in the trash. That's the order it should work. I meet people all the time. They come into my office. My mom died a couple weeks ago. I just sold her house this weekend. I'm her power of attorney. All right, sit down. I'm just gonna ruin your day here in the next 30 seconds. She's dead, your POA is no good, and you signed a contract that's not valid, right? The or works only if you are at peace with that person that you put or on in getting it. Like legally, you made two owners. When you pass away, that's the owner. All that money is theirs. If you have a lot of other kids, they're all gonna be like, what happened to the money? Now, I'd like to think that your second person would do the right thing and pass it on, but legally they don't have to. Unintended consequences, you name your son on your account, your other kids now aren't getting anything. He intended, of course, to pass it on and spread it out, share it, but what if he dies? Now all of that money goes to his kids, right? It's unintended consequences. I'm a big fan of put the pay on death. The whole start of the conversation was probate was 6 to 12 months, right? If you have beneficiaries on your assets, your kids are gonna have to cool their jets for about 2 weeks, because that's how long it takes to get a death certificate. So if you can live with the 2-week window, just put all your kids on as pay on death. They're gonna get, we're guaranteeing an equal result, we're guaranteeing exactly what you wanted, and they're just gonna have to cool it for 2 weeks. And I hope they take those 2 weeks and mourn you, right?
Yeah.
So that's the way I think about it.
That's what my dad did when he
Yep.
passed away, and we got it very timely.
Smart man.
Yeah, and believe me, I was in a situation where how happenstances happened, I needed that money because of the fact that how an event happened where, man, I would have been literally on the street, possibly poor. You know? So I'm grateful for that, doing that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Makes a big difference.
It does.
There's not one single person that doesn't have to have some kind of plan in place. There could be a different plan for everybody, but it's gotta have something in place.
Now, I'm a renter
Mhm.
and a single person. Now, and I had mentioned this to a friend of mine, we work out together, here, and I mentioned about maybe wanting to get a will together, and he's in the funeral business, and, he said with the amount of, he looked it up, and he got that number 50,000,
Mhm.
and he did tell me that, but he's gonna give me, I haven't met with him late, but get me a form for, I think you even alluded to that very form,
Mhm.
that he's gonna be giving me,
Transfer by affidavit.
probably is what that was, yeah, so.
And that won't, I mean, that doesn't go into effect until you pass away, right? So everything is yours. The only issue with the transfer by affidavit is it moves those assets, but essentially it moves the assets regardless of what your will could say. You know, we're literally just saying there's $300 in this account. The bank doesn't care where it goes. No one cares where it goes. We just have to move it. And the bank just wants a piece of paper to CYA. If anyone ever comes back looking for $300, they gotta be able to show, well, yeah, I went to the guy named Larry. I don't know who Larry is, but that's the point of that. So it's an easy way to move a forgotten asset, something that's small. I really wouldn't advise someone just to rely on that. I would really suggest you put a pay on death on your bank account. You know, you decide, you're putting the beneficiary on when you do a pay on death, when you add a name to a beneficiary. A transfer on death really is used after you die for something you forgot to do, right? So I would really like to see you start having a little more control. You put it down, you know what it is, and you're guaranteeing it's gonna go where you want it to go.
Yeah.
I would do it that way.
And when you say that the word 50,000, now you're talking about just like physical assets, you're not talking about like what's in my IRA or anything?
No, that 50,000 are bank accounts, investments, life insurance. It's all of your assets.
Oh.
Now, that's all of the assets that don't have a beneficiary.
Okay. Oh,
So if you have a beneficiary in your IRA, that goes. My life insurance, that went here. My bank account, that went there. But what's left, if that's under 50, oh my gosh, he forgot to do 2 things. He did 8 other accounts, but he forgot 2 of them. If that's under 50, we can transfer by affidavit. Does that make sense?
yes.
So if you do everything by transfer of death, then you don't need a power of attorney?
Well, so again, 2 separate issues. You need a power of attorney to take care of you when you're alive. my health and my finances. I got a lot of living to do.
Right.
But when I die, now my will, my pay on death, transfer on death, that kicks in, right? That's the difference. It's, an estate plan is two sides of a coin. I'm alive, all nuts, now I'm dead, right? So you gotta cover both.
For upon death, what is it right after that? You just said that.
Pay on death, transfer on death.
Oh, okay.
It's word salad.
Yeah.
Pay on death, transfer on death, beneficiary, it just means who gets it when I'm gone. Different institutions use different language. Banks call it pay on death. Credit unions call it a beneficiary.
So you were saying earlier, you said about 2/3 of the people don't have a will or anything like that, so then the 2/3 of the people can go under probate then,
If the assets are over that 50, they're gonna end up in probate.
and how much probate costs?
Well, it's so you've got the court fees. If you hire an attorney, it's gonna be at least $5,000. I can promise you it's gonna be at least $5,000. You won't pay it, you're dead. But it's $5,000 that's not gonna be going to your loved ones.
And then it takes super long.
Yep. 6 to 12 months.
When my dad passed, my sister was born, because of the plan, she
And plus planning
told her
the,
to probate, she charged us $300 an hour.
$300 an hour?
Yeah,
What was the end cost on
I
that?
don't know what the end cost was.
It probably was a lot.
But,
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
you have to remember it's a small town in Minnesota too.
Well, you know, and again, I
It
can't,
went pretty fast, the probate too.
yeah, I can't knock it. It's a year-long project, so you're not gonna do it for $500, right? So, but a little bit of planning on your end saves all that time and money. Why would you not? I think it's one of the most loving things you can do for your family and your loved ones, your friends. Put a plan in place. When you're gone, there's gonna be enough problems of his own.
Yep.
You know, I don't know what he intended. I don't know what to do. You wanna put that on your family?